The night wind blows across the Ethiopian plateau, where the cliffs stand like blades of the blue sky. There it is said that every soul is born with a crack, a message from fate. There are lives chosen from birth to wear the glorious crown, but there are also lives born only to be sold. Like a commodity, on a red sunset, amid the cries of women and the screams of men in chains, a young black boy was dragged from his village. His name was unknown. No one had time to record his age. No one had time to see him one last time. The ropes tightened around his arms as if to strangle his future. The world saw him as anonymous, and that anonymity was the beginning of a legend. His journey begins in Abyssinia, crosses the sea, and ends in a completely unfamiliar place, the Mughal Empire, land of powerful emperors, of thousands of gilded palaces, but also of the most reviled people. When he landed in India, his eyes looked at the cold stone walls, the elephants thundering past. No one asked where he came from. No one asked what he wanted. They asked only one thing: how much was he worth? But there are some fates that the more they are pushed into the mud, the more paths that no one dares to imagine open up. Little did he know that the very place that wanted to crush him, that would be the place that helped him. Blossom. You will become a slave, then become a warrior, then become a general, then became the man that the entire Mughal dynasty feared, then Beko Mek, who can change the fate of an entire country with just a nod of his head. A life thrown into darkness, but then lit up like a spark in the middle of the night. If this story resonates with you, please leave a like, a subscribe, and a comment. Each of your support is a drop in the river of storytelling. So, the journey of that black slave. Let it begin. Part 1. Sold out of HOM. The nights in Ethiopia are usually as quiet as an unopened page of a scripture. But that night, the silence was shattered by banging on doors, screaming, and running footsteps. Bands of slavers poured into the village like ghosts. They didn't care who was right or wrong. They just chose people in the most brutal way: who was strong, who was young, who could sell for a good price. The black boy was dragged out of the house like a sack. His mother rushed forward, hugging the soldier's legs and crying until she was hoarse. The soldier only kicked her aside. The world then did not consider people as people, but only as goods on the books. His eyes, when he looked back at the village for the last time, had no cries, no tears, only a cold emptiness. That emptiness would follow him for the rest of his life, like a wound that would never heal. Tied to a camel, he was carried through long days until he reached the shore where hundreds of other slaves awaited their fate. Some cried, some prayed, some fell into a state of limbo, but he did not. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on the sea where the sun sank each day. The traders called him Habshi, that is, one from the west of India, from Abyssinia. To them, the name was not a title of respect, it was a label. But strangely enough, it was that very label that would later become the symbol that made all of India bow. The ship set sail. The smell of sweat, blood, and despair lingered in the cramped space. Every day, several men died. Their bodies were thrown into the sea like stones. He watched the bodies sink into the water, then looked at his hands, thin, scarred hands, but still clenched. Even though no one taught him, he understood one thing: if you let go, you will be the next one thrown into the sea. One afternoon, when the ship docked at the Indian port of Surat, he saw for the first time the Mughal towers that seemed to pierce the clouds. The guards wore shining armor. Merchants from Persia, Uzbek, Turk, Arab, crowded together like a river of people. This world is so big that it engulfs his life in the blink of an eye. He was sold the same day. No papers, no name, no freedom. You just have fate, but fate is sometimes the sharpest knife. Part 2. Entering the Mughal Empire after weeks adrift. The black teenager was finally pulled from the damp hold of the ship into sunlight. It wasn't salvation, it was the cold gaze of a distant god. Examining a tiny life, Surat appeared to him like a different world. In Abyssinia, he had known only windswept mountains, green valleys, and sleepy villages. But here was a gateway to the Mughal Empire, a place where merchants and soldiers from all over poured in, where the voices of dozens of cultures mingled like a chaotic river. Mughal soldiers stood guard on the stone steps. Their armor reflected the sunlight so brightly that it hurt their eyes. They did not look at slaves as people. They looked at them as one would look at cargo unloaded from a ship to see if they were fit for use, if they could stand the sun and wind, if they were strong. He was pushed toward a man in a Baluchi tunic with a soft flowing black beard. He lifted his chin with his hand, as if inspecting a horse for sale. Then he nodded to the merchant. That was it, his life had been bought for the price of a good sword. No one asked his name, no one asked where he started. Even his soul, at this moment, seemed to not know who it belonged to. Taken into the first Mughal fortress, he felt like he was lost in the maze of a vast empire. The walls were so high they blocked out the sun. The long corridors made his footsteps sound like someone else was walking them for him. The palace didn't feel like a place to live, it felt like a machine of power. Every stone a reminder that he was but dust. The Mughals treated slaves differently. They didn't just use them for manual labor. Some slaves, particularly the Habshi from East Africa, were used as soldiers, guards, or put to dangerous tasks to see who was worth keeping. The empire was so vast that they weren't afraid to sacrifice a few lives just to find a useful talent. He was assigned to the military training group. The reason was simple. He had a sturdy build, sharp eyes, and an elusive silence. It was this elusiveness, what might have been a flaw, that caught the attention of Mughal commanders. In the early days, he was physically abused until every joint ached. He was forced to wear heavy armor under the scorching sun. He was taught how to stand, how to hold a spear, how to throw a javelin, how not to fall before he died. He never said a word, and it was his silence that made people think he was afraid. But the truth is, you are watch every competition in the barracks, every secret fight after practice. There was jealousy between the Persians, the Arabs, the Turks, and the Rajputs. The Mughal Empire wasn't just a powerful machine, it was a place where everyone was vying for the top spot. And someone like him, a nameless man from Abyssinia, stood at the very bottom of that pressure cooker of power. Once, an old Turk soldier kicked him hard in the back and asked in a contemptuous voice, "Habshi, do you know where this place is? This is no place for daydreaming slaves." He raised his head, said nothing, did not gasp, did not tremble. That silence annoyed the Turk more than any reply, but it also caught someone else's attention. The man was the young commander of the camp, a royal Mughal noble, his eyes as sharp as a knife. He had watched him for days. He saw how he endured hardship without complaining. He saw how his hand held the spear without trembling. He saw the unconscious discipline in his every step, something not everyone possessed. And he said something that he would remember for many years to come. "You are not a slave. You are the one waiting to be called by your true worth." It was the first time in months that someone looked at him like a human being. Just one sentence, but it was like a small flame blown into the ashes. The Mughal Empire was a strange one. It was both harsh and generous. If you were weak, you would be crushed without mercy. But if you were strong, you would be given opportunities to rise. Opportunities you might not have had in your own impoverished homeland. And it was in that harshness that he understood one important thing in Mughal: no one cares where you come from. There is only one question: what can you become? He didn't know where he was going, but he knew the sea had not swallowed him whole. The Ethiopian wind did not tear his soul, and the cruelty of this world, in some strange way, is testing whether he can rise from the mud. Part 3. The silence of the observer. In the Mughal camp, where every footstep sounded like a hammer blow on the stone floor, the black youth lived his days unnoticed, but his presence was unforgettable. He was recognized not by what he said, but by who he was. Never say. In an environment where the strong like to show off, the weak like to complain, and the arrogant like to shout to prove themselves, his silence became a strange, almost uncomfortable thing. But that silence was his first layer of armor. The Mughal camp was not a place for rest. It was a miniature battlefield, a place where people tested each other, competed with each other, and vilified each other all day long. Soldiers from Turkey, Central Asia, Afghanistan, Persia, brought with them pride, prejudices, and even hatreds from their homelands. Sometimes they quarreled not for any great reason, but because they wanted to prove that they belonged here more than anyone else. He observed them all, the way a young lion observes a herd of animals to see who was strong, who was weak, who was easily provoked, who was worth avoiding. And he realized one thing. In Mughal, silence was not a sign of weakness. Silence is the way to survive. Once, in the middle of the training ground, a brawl broke out because two soldiers disagreed about who would carry the shield first. One wrong glance and they charged at each other like wounded animals. The commander had to shout to stop them. "You stand right there. You can either go in or leave." But he chose to stand still, to watch. You see how a person keeps his balance, how a person lets go of their left hand too soon, the way a person hesitates a beat before attacking. Not that he wanted to interfere, but because you are studying, people learn from teachers, from generals, from scriptures, and you learn from chaos. The truth is that chaos teaches people more than peace. One misty morning, while the soldiers were practicing formation, the commander gave him a spear without saying anything, without giving him any instructions, just threw it at him, as if testing what he would do with it. He held the spear with both hands. Raw wood, cold iron, heavy, but balanced. That commander signaled, "Throw." No one expected anything. What would a slavant from Abyssinia to know about Mughal spearmanship? But he stood still for a few seconds, breathing evenly, eyes closed for half a second, then he threw. The spear flew not with force alone, but with the certainty of one who knew he had no right to fail. It shot toward the distant wooden target and stabbed into the trunk, shaking like a leaf blown by a strong wind. All turned to look, especially those who used to laugh at you. The commander slightly curled his lips, not a smile but a sign of recognition. But he was not happy. He did not bow his head, don't even say thank you. He just quietly returned to the line. The whole barracks began to notice him. The Habshi did not boast, did not demand, did not challenge anyone, but there was a cold certainty in every movement, and that coldness was uncomfortable. Some soldiers began to test him. When push shoulders, sometimes throw insults, sometimes it's about skin color. He did not respond. He did not fight. back. He took only a step back, but his eyes never dropped. It was that look that made many strong people feel guilty, because there is a truth that people often forget. The most gentle person is the hardest to judge, and the hardest to judge is the scariest. One evening, as the barracks was filled with the sound of changing of the guard drums, the young commander called him in for the first time, not to give him an order, but to ask, "What is your name?" He was silent for a few seconds. Wasn't that he didn't understand the question, it was that it had but so long since anyone had asked his name. "Jamal," he said softly. It was the old name, the name that had been almost buried under the dust of memory when he was sold. The commander nodded. "Jamal, the name means beauty. I hope you know how to keep that name from being soiled by fools." It was their first conversation. Short but more important than any battle, because from that moment, he knew he was no longer a commodity. The Mughal scroll, though they were recognized his worth, and that is dangerous, very dangerous, because where there is an opportunity to rise, there are also people pushing us down. Your silence is no longer a cover, it becomes a weapon. Part 4. Talent revealed in the middle of war. That morning, the Mughal camp was no longer filled with the usual practice calls. Instead, there was a long, sharp, metallic sound of horns scraping the air. Unsettled horses stamped the ground. Generals ran here and there, their armor half-buttoned. War, the thing the Mughal Empire had always known was coming, was finally knocking at the door. The attackers were one of the rebellious tribes of the Western Deccan, a small group, but the essence of their danger lay not in their numbers, but in their recklessness. They fought as men with nothing to lose, and men like that are sometimes more fearsome than large armies. Jamal, then just a trainee, was rushed to the rear. No one expected anything from him except to hold his spear steady and not die too soon. But he did not view the Mughal line with the eyes of a novice. His eyes scanned the terrain, the distances, the speed of the enemy, as if each piece of chaos before him were clues arranged just for him. The battle began with a roar. The mutineers charged like a storm. The Mughal spears formed a wall of steel, but at some point he sensed a small gap between the two units, where the Mughal soldiers were still fumbling to get into formation. They don't see, but Jamal saw. The enemy charged straight towards that gap. If it was breached, the entire Mughal formation would be split in two. A small mistake could turn the tide of battle. He wanted to shout a warning, but it was not in his nature to use shouts to change fate. He used actions. Jamal jumped out of line. No one called, no one allowed, but he charged as if his life or the entire camp depended on it. The commander saw the black figure rushing away and was startled. That Habshi soldier, what was he doing? But before he could shout, Jamal had already reached the clearing where 3 rebel cavalrymen were charging like living spears. He did not dodge, he did not back down. Jamal drove the spear into the ground, pivoting on his own body, and swung it in a powerful arc. The blow was not the work of a single man, it was the culmination of hours of observation, practice, and endurance. The impact exploded like thunder. A cat fell from his horse. The horse reared. The remaining 2 had to tighten their reins to avoid crashing into each other. The gap is patched in seconds. The Mughals did not record it in history books, but those present that day knew. A black recruit had just saved hundreds of lives from being bisected. The battle continued, but the tide was turning. The Mughal commander decided to counter it. The cry echoed like thunder off the mountainside. And for the first time in his life, Jamal feels like he's not being dragged into a war, he's stepping onto the stage of destiny. Himself. The young commander, the one who had asked his name, suddenly appeared beside him. His armor was dusty, his eyes sharp. "You," he said quickly, "follow me." Jamal didn't ask why. He just followed. The 2 men charged into the gap between the 2 armies where the enemy was trying to reorganize. The Mughal commander wanted to strike at the enemy center, breaking their morale before they could regain their composure. It was a bold plan, and to do it, he needed someone with the courage to step into places others did not dare to tread. Jamal. Arrows whizzed past his ears. The shining blades swirled through the air like silver snakes. But Jamal did not back down. His every move evoked something only survivors from the deepest darkness understand. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is a reminder that we are still alive. As a rebel soldier charged, sword raised, Jamal turned, lowered his center of gravity, used the butt of his spear to block the attack, then pushed forward like a bamboo that bends but does not break. The soldier was stunned, and before he could gather his wits, Jamal's spear had knocked him off his horse. The Mughal commander saw. Other soldiers saw. Even the enemy could sense that, among that sea of people, there was one who stood firmer than the rest. A man who was once considered a commodity. Man who was once led around like a pet. Man who once had no name. Now standing like a milestone in the middle of the battlefield. Towards the end of the battle, as the afternoon sunlight slanted through the dust, the rebels began to retreat. They did not retreat because they had lost, but because there was hesitation, wavering, doubt, and sometimes the slightest doubt can cause an army to crumble. Mughal commander stood on a rock ledge, watching the enemy retreat. Then he turned to Jamal. No compliments, no smile, no statement, just one sentence. But it changes fate. From today, you will no longer stand in the back row. Jamal bowed his head, not to show gratitude, but to hide the look that first lit up like a spark in a forge, fire, something the Mughal Empire had inadvertently fanned. Part 5. From slave to WRORA. After that day's battle, the Mughal camp changed its gaze towards Jamal. No more contemptuous looks. No more whispers and mocking. Instead, there was silence. Not the silence of contempt, but the silence of caution. People are always afraid of those who can do what they do not dare to do. That's even more frightening when that person once stood at the bottom of society. The next day, Jamal was called to the guards' private training area, place usually reserved for those with special potential. There was no laughter here, no chaos of recruits. This was a place where every breath was disciplined. The young commander, who had witnessed Jamal in the midst of battle, stood there, his eyes as calm as water. "You," he said, "from today belong to my team. No formalities. No oath. No party. Mughal recognition never comes with flowers and wine. It comes with double the work, 10 times the responsibility, and 100 times the road." Jamal did not appear happy. He just bowed his head deeply. "Because you know, this is not a reward. This is a higher challenge where even a small mistake can kill you faster than the battlefield." The following days, he was trained in a completely different way. If before he only learned how to hold a spear, hold a shield, run dozens of laps around the barracks, now he learned things that normal people were never allowed to touch. You get to learn how to read your opponent's movements, how to look at the shoulder to predict a blow, how to listen to the horse to know the speed of the attack. He was taught how to use a short knife in a confined space, how to fall without breaking bones, how to keep his feet in the mud, how to fight when surrounded. The commander did not say much, but every sentence he said was like a sword piercing straight to the core of the problem. Don't hit fast, hit right. Don't run fast, run steady. Don't memorize techniques, understand. Jamal heard everything and turned them into flesh and blood. The barracks began to test him in more severe ways. One morning, when the fog was still covering the training ground, the commander ordered, "Today, 3 people will face you." 3 sturdy soldiers stepped forward. There was no animosity, they were just doing their job, testing Jamal's worthiness to be among the elite. Jamal didn't swallow, don't shaking hands, no hesitation. He stood straight, toes pointed slightly forward, arms relaxed, the posture of someone used to facing death, not people. The shout rang out. 3 people rushed in at the same time. The first is the cavalry, the power that bursts forth like a tiger's pounce. The second is the archer, fast, agile, likes to hit from behind. The third is the infantryman, steady in defense, steady in attack, slow but stubborn. A normal person would tremble. Even a good man will struggle. But Jamal just let out a sigh. He took a half step back, just enough for the strongest man to miss. Use your left hand to block the fastest person's attack. Turn a small angle to avoid slashes from third person. Then, while the other 3 were still adjusting their balance, he turned around, using his body as the axis, and swept his leg really low. 3 people fell at the same time. No one believed their eyes. Your attack is not strong. No embellishments. No show off. It's brutally simple. It's like he's pulled out the core of fighting, where victory doesn't come from aggression, but from understanding of rhythm. The commander just looked and said, "Okay," just one word. But it was the first Mughal mark that was engraved on Jamal's fate from slave to warrior. That night, Jamal sat alone in the yard. The moon hung high, casting his shadow long on the sand. He looked at his hands that had been tied, dragged, used to do hard work. Now those hands hold spears, swords, and even their own future. He is not proud. Don't be complacent. Don't cry. He just felt heavy. Heavy because of the understanding that once climbed the ladder, there will never be a way back. The Mughal Empire gave him his chance, but also requires you to pay with all, and he was ready. Part 6. The dark shadow in the PLSI. Within the Mughal Empire, a place of gold and power, there was always another side, dark and poisonous. That was the royal court, and Jamal, now a true warrior, had finally entered the land where even the royals had to be careful with every breath. If the battlefield is where people die by swords, then the palace is where people die by words. One wrong word, a wrong view, a false nod, even silence can make a person disappear forever. One day, the commander called Jamal in, his voice calm but sharp as a knife. "From today, you will follow me to court." Jamal bowed his head slightly. No questions, no surprise. But deep in his eyes, there was a hint of hesitation. The royal court was not a place for people like him. People who rose from the bottom of society too quickly were always seen as a thorn in the side of the nobility. Know that. And the commander knows it too, but he still said, "What I need from you is not your voice, but the eyes. Eyes to observe, to read the situation, to see things others cannot, or rather, to see the things they deliberately hide." That morning, Jamal followed his commander through the great gates of the city. The Mughal palace opened up like another world. High domes that seemed to touch the sky, intricately carved pillars, long corridors that wound like a maze. But that beauty did not overwhelm Jamal. What made him uneasy were the eyes. They looked at him not as a warrior. They looked as if to ask, why would a black man, a former slave, dare to enter this place? Who brought it here? What is its purpose? Jamal responded to all of this with silence. Silence had become his survival instinct. During the first court meeting, Jamal stood behind the commander, his eyes scanning each person. There are many royals, there are many officials, the general is proud. Everyone was beautiful, elegant, powerful, but Jamal wasn't looking at the brocade. He looked at his hand, he looked into the eyes, he watched how each person moved, and he saw one thing clearly. This palace is divided in two, or rather, split into pieces. Piece of the great prince faction, piece of the little prince faction, pieces of the Persian ministers, pieces of the Turkish generals, pieces of Rajput nobles. Everyone talks about loyalty, but everyone is holding a knife behind the back of the person next to them. In the middle of the meeting, a young prince looked at Jamal and smiled faintly. Who is this new Habshi? Why is he standing here? The question was as light as the wind, but sharper than a sword. Jamal did not reply. He stared straight into space in front of him, as if the other person had just spoken to an invisible person. The commander stepped forward and clasped his hands. That is my man. The prince raised his eyebrows. You say a former slave is the general's man. The atmosphere in the palace was heavy. Some of the officials smiled slightly, the smile of those who enjoy witnessing the humiliation of others. The commander remained calm. He was a slave, but he is no longer a slave. You want him to prove it right here. The statement was half threat, half challenge, but what surprised many people the most was Jamal's reaction. Don't bow your head, no, back down, don't show anger. He stood still, like a stone pillar in the wind. The young prince turned away, but his eyes flashed with displeasure. He doesn't like people who don't know how to bow their heads, especially someone who was at rock bottom like Jamal. From that moment, Jamal understood. In the royal court, the enemy is not the one who shouts at you, but the one who laughs with me. In the following days, Jamal accompanied his commander to more meetings. He began to understand more deeply the chaos of the Mughal court. The emperor was old. The princes were expecting him to die. Generals choose sides in advance. The ministers secretly exchanged benefits. Every word has two sides. Every nod hides an intention. And somewhere, Jamal could feel that a storm of thrones was approaching. A storm that could sweep everything into its vortex, crushing even those who thought themselves as strong as mountains. You were just a little warrior, but his eyes saw what many powerful people did not want to see. One night, when Jamal returned to camp, the commander called him to the fire. He spoke slowly, but each word was heavy, you see. Jamal nodded. No need to say more. The commander smiled, a rare smile. Okay, you can see the shadow in the palace, but from now on, remember this. He looked Jamal straight in the eye. When the darkness in the court spreads to the camp, people like you and me are always the first to suffer. Jamal was silent, but a vague premonition arose in his heart, like the distant beat of drums signaling an impending battle. Not a battle on the battlefield, but it is a battle between people and their own ambitions. Part 7. He saved a prince in the middle of Blade Buaranes. Not every battle in life has the sound of horns, the sound of horse hooves, or the beating of drums. There were battles that broke out right in the heart of the palace, unexpected and more brutal than the battles in the desert. And that night, Jamal realized it in an unexpected way. It was raining heavily that day. The Indian summer rain was not as gentle as mist, but like thousands of needles piercing the ground. The domes of the palace shook. Water poured down the ancient stone steps, as if washing away the sins that the court tried to hide. Jamal followed the commander to the palace where they had been summoned for no apparent reason. When they arrived, the commander understood a prince was about to leave the city for the northern camp, and they needed an escort. The prince was young, his eyes were bright, but to clear for a place as scheming as the palace. He greeted the commander with respect. Then, when he saw Jamal, he paused slightly. This is the Habshi warrior they speak of. The commander replied, yes, and you're lucky he's with you today. The remark sounded redundant, but the commander was not joking. He knew something was wrong in the palace, something that only an experienced person like him could smell. They reached the eastern gate where the road led out of the city. The guards stood guard, but their eyes were furtive, as if they had something to hide. The rain obscured visibility, but Jamal sensed something was wrong. The air was heavy as iron. The wind carried a metallic smell, the smell of betrayal. The commander turned to Jamal. Stay close to me. Don't take your eyes off that porch. Jamal looked in the direction indicated, a dark wooden porch where a shadow could hide. Not long after, things happened as predicted. As the group entered a narrow passage, the lanterns were extinguished by the wind, and from the darkness came the clang of steel. Shadows swooped down like bats leaving a cave. A group of assassins hired by a royal faction wants to usurp the throne. They are not aiming at the commander. Do not aim at the escort soldiers. They aimed straight at the prince. The first slash sliced through the air, a flash of steel cutting through the rain. Before the prince could comprehend what was happening, Jamal was already at him like an arrow. No time to think. There is no time to hesitate. Jamal did not choose to save the prince. Instinct chooses for you. An assassin hurled a spear from the roof. Jamal spun, throwing his arm up to block it. The blade sliced through his flesh, but he felt no pain, only heat running through his body. One breath, one turn. He slammed his elbow into the attacker's neck, causing him to collapse with a choking sound. The commander shouted, drawing his sword and slashing at the other two. Steel clashed like thunder. The escort soldiers began to react, but the assassins cared nothing for anyone else. They were only after the prince. The prince stepped back, eyes wide, frightened but trying not to panic. Another assassin lunged from the right, his knife as sharp as a falcon's talons. Jamal lunged, not with a spear but with his body. He slammed his fist into the man's chest, knocking them both to the mud. The assassin sprang up first, brandishing his knife. Jamal grabbed his wrist, squeezing so hard he dropped his weapon in pain. Then he broke his neck in one clean motion. Not out of cruelty, but if he was a second late, the prince would die. The battle didn't last long, but it was long enough to turn many fates around. Two of the assassins fled when they saw defeat. The rest lay face down in the cold mud. None of them survived. The commander looked around, breathing heavily, his voice still steady. "Prince, are you okay?" The prince gasped. I'm alive, thanks to him." He looked at Jamal not as a prince, looked at a warrior, but as a man looked at the man who had just saved him from death. Jamal stood there, his chest heaving. Blood ran down his arm and mixed with the rain, spreading a pale red stream. The prince took a step forward and said slowly, "I owe you my life." One sentence, but enough to change a person's fate. After that event, rumors spread in the royal court. A Habshi warrior saves the prince from assassination. A former slave did what many royal guards could not. A man who was once despised has just proven his worth with blood. The news spread like wildfire, and like all news in the royal court, it carried two kinds of eyes: respect from those who understand bravery, and jealousy from those who fear losing power. The commander knows that. He looked at Jamal and said, "You did what needed to be done, but from today on, your name will make many people uncomfortable." Jamal just nodded. "You understand, in this place, saving one person can save yourself, or maybe make the whole court want to kill you." But Jamal has no regrets. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for survival. He fought for a life and for what was right. Philosophy. At the end of part 7, there are moments when our choices save not just a life but our own soul. Just say it, okay? Continue. Let me write. Part 8. Became a general, the only black man at the top of Mughal military power. Part 8. Becoming a general, the only black man at the top of Mughal power. Asterisk. In the Mughal years, fame didn't come in a straight line. It came in circles, or dark paths, or bloody paths. But for Jamal, who had come from the lowest depths of human existence, fame came in the quietest of ways. No one shouted, "Congratulations," no fanfare. No wine to celebrate. It was just a quiet afternoon in the barracks, as the sun was setting behind the walls, when the commander called Jamal over. The commander stood behind a large wooden table, his hand resting on a scroll of silk stamped with the imperial seal. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were the eyes of someone about to hand over something that would change the other person's life. "Jamal," he said slowly, "you are summoned to court." Jamal frowned slightly. What reason did someone like him have to be called into the palace? The commander continued. "The prince spoke to the emperor, and the emperor wants to make you the commander of the lower guard." Jamal stood still, not surprised, not happy, but there was a silence in the eyes, the silence of one who knows that another door has opened, and that door is not easy to enter. "I know you don't care about rank," said the commander, "but the Mughals will not allow you to refuse. You have saved the prince's life, and with that you have entered the game of power. There is no escape." Jamal said nothing. He just reached out to receive the roll of silk. Light silk roll, but the responsibility in it is heavy as a rock. Rumors spread fast in the barracks. The looks at Jamal changed dramatically. Some people admire, but mostly fear and jealousy, because of a cruel truth. People do not hate the strong. People hate the strong from the bottom. In the eyes of many Mughal nobles, Jamal was a paradox: a black man, a former slave, a person who is not of Persian, Turkic or Rajput blood, a person with no family background, no backing, no lineage, and yet he was knighted, placed on top of hundreds of other warriors. That makes many people feel like the world is being rearranged, and they don't like it. The investiture ceremony took place in the palace. The Mughal emperor was old at that time, but his eyes were still bright and full of authority. He looked at Jamal a long time, not the look of one observing a warrior, but of one weighing fate. "Are you a Habshi?" the emperor asked. "Yes, your majesty." "Did you know that this empire was once protected by another Habshi, Malik Amber, who shook the Deccan?" Jamal had never heard, but he kept quiet. The emperor smiled. "You don't need to know the past. You only need to know the present. And right now, I need someone like you." He gave Jamal a new sword hilt, its silver handle engraved with intricate designs. "This is not a reward," said the emperor. "This is a reminder. If you stand upright, this sword will be honorable. If you take a wrong step, This sword will be evidence against you." Jamal bowed his head and accepted it without pride, but without fear either. You understand. Standing in the light also means standing in front of countless knives hidden in the dark. From that day on, Jamal's position changed. He no longer sleeps in the dormitory. No more eating with regular soldiers. No more being bossed around or criticized to your face. He was taken to the senior guards' quarters, provided with private horse, get better armor, escorted by soldiers when entering and leaving the palace. But the higher you go, the more clearly you see one thing. The loneliness of climbing from the bottom is the coldest kind of loneliness. You have no allies, no clan to protect, no factions, only the sword, and myself. And so it was no wonder that rumors began to spread, that Habshi is just a toy of the prince. He has no lineage. Even if he is appointed, he probably won't stay long. He will soon be crushed by the court. But Jamal didn't care. He didn't have time to care because just a week after his appointment, war broke out on the eastern border, and Jamal, as a young general, was ordered to lead a small army to assist. The old commander put his hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You have climbed high. Now prove you are not the one who climbed the wrong ladder." Jamal nodded. In his deep black eyes, there was no longer the fear of someone who had been sold. No more feeling lost as the first person to enter the hall of power. Now is the silence of a man ready to face the world. Part 9. The weakening of the Mughal Empire. There are empires that fall because of external enemies. There are empires that collapse because of natural disasters, famine, or constant war. But the Mughal Empire, the empire that once swayed the subcontinent, was weakening in the quietest of ways. It is rotten from the inside. Jamal didn't need anyone to tell him that. He saw the rot every day. The way a skilled craftsman can see where a table will crack by the grain of the wood. 1. Extravagance beyond limit. Mughal palaces were still resplendent, so resplendent that one forgot the stone beneath was cracking. The banquets never ceased. The receptions lasted into the night, and goods from Persia, Samarkand, Istanbul were brought in at the cost of a tax season. Meanwhile, the farmers out there are exhausted by heavy taxes. Merchants are burdened with multiple layers of fees. The more remote areas were constantly crying out for looting. The palace is too bright. The country is too dark. An empire cannot survive long when light and darkness are so divided to war between the princes themselves. The emperor is old and weak. The princes began to form factions. Jamal once stood behind the commander in a court meeting when no one said a war was starting, but everyone knew. The air was thick as if suffocated. A prince said loudly, "You talk too much. One day your tongue will get the better of you." A Persian minister replied bluntly, "And you, one day will harm this very country." No one said the word rebel. No one said the word usurpation, but the shadow of those two words lurked on every face. Jamal stood behind the commander like a shadow, but he saw everything more clearly than they thought. His eyes were like water, mirrors reflecting all the cracks. 3. The army's morale wavered in the barracks. Soldiers whispered to each other, "If Prince A ascends the throne, we will be rewarded. But if Prince B ascends, he will destroy this faction. If Prince C wins, then my life is over." The Mughal army was strongest when united, but now each of them had his own calculations. And when the army's morale was divided, without needing an enemy attack, the empire would break itself. Jamal's commander said one day, "Empires do not die by the sword. Empires die by suspicion." Jamal nodded slightly. He saw that doubt in the eyes of every soldier, every general, every sentry standing guard at night whose spear was no longer as steady as before. 4. Rebel groups begin to raise their heads. News from far away is getting worse. In Deccan, local lords refused to pay taxes. In Bengal, merchants complained about piracy and the irresponsibility of officials. In Punjab, Sikhs revolted because of oppression. In Gujarat, bandit groups are more powerful than patrols. Jamal is tasked with quelling small groups on the frontier. He traveled from region to region, always facing rebels, driven not by ambition but by desperation. A poor village elder said to Jamal, "We are not against the emperor, we only fight hunger." That statement left Jamal silent for a long time. He understood that the battlefield was no longer about strength or weakness. It is a matter of life and death of commoners, something the royal court often forgets the quickest. 5. The turning away of those who were once loyal. In his return to the capital, Jamal noticed many familiar faces missing from the court. Someone was exiled. Someone suddenly became seriously ill. Someone was stripped of his position. Someone left the city at night and never returned. Even Jamal's commander grew more cautious. Less words, more watchful eyes. One day he whispered to Jamal, "From now on, don't trust anyone, not even me. Not because I betrayed, but because one day people will force me to betray you." Jamal listened and sensed something tightening around the empire. Not an enemy, but destiny. 6. Widening cracks. 1 month, Jamal returned to the capital and found the palace strange. To many guards, to many eyes watching, to many closed doors. Rumors spread. The two princes have begun to prepare their own armies. No one said it, but everyone knew. Civil war is coming. And when civil war breaks out, people like Jamal Black, without faction, without family, without backing, will stand in the line of 1,000 swords. The commander watched as the empire he had worked so hard for all his life declined day by day. He said to Jamal in a heavy voice, "When an empire stands on mud, the one who falls first is always the one who stands strongest." Jamal understood. The prince whose life you saved will need you, and the prince's enemy will also find a way to eliminate you. When the wheel of history begins to turn rapidly, no one can stand on the sidelines anymore. Not even Jamal. Part 10. He became a mediator between powers in a time of turmoil in the Mughal Empire, when each faction sought to tilt the balance of power in their favor. Jamal, a black man who had been a slave, became the name most often mentioned behind closed doors. Not because you are the most powerful, not because you are the richest, it's not because you're of royal blood, but because of you is the person that every side wants to own. 1. Why do they need Jamal? In the court, the princes all knew one thing. The army was no longer loyal to the throne but to the commander they trusted, and an uncomfortable truth for them: the military believes Jamal. They know you're on the front lines. They know you fight for justice, not profit. They know he treats them fairly, without regional or ethnic bias. Such a man in times of chaos is more dangerous than a prince, and so each side wants to pull Jamal to their side, or kill you if you are on the other side. 2. First invitation. One afternoon, as Jamal was inspecting the guard, a man in a silk robe approached. It was an emissary from the second prince, a man known for his cunning. "The Marquis wishes to see you," the messenger said, his voice soft and sharp. "The Marquis highly values your talents, and you will be greatly rewarded if you side with us." Jamal looked him straight in the eye. "I stand with the Empire." The messenger smiled. "The Empire no longer exists. Only those who fight over the last bones remain." Then he left, not forgetting to leave a sentence: "You don't choose sides, but the sides choose you." 3. Second invitation. Not long after, the eldest prince, who was considered legitimate, had Jamal summoned to the palace. The prince looked at him, his eyes thoughtful. "You saved my brother's life. If you come with me, I promise to promote you to the highest rank of general." Jamal did not refuse, but also did not accept. He just said, "I do not wish to take up swords against the royal family." The prince looked at him for a long time. Sometimes not holding a sword also means becoming a target for everyone. Jamal understood. In the royal court, the neutral person is the one who dies the easiest. 4. Jamal becomes an unwilling bridge. So from then on, Jamal was caught between 3 pools. The Grand Prince faction wants to pull him into the mainstream. The Little Prince's faction wants to use you to tip the military balance. The army wants you to guarantee stability. No side is strong enough to force you, but neither side dared to let him go free. Jamal became someone everyone had to be wary of. 1 word from you can make the army switch sides. 1 decision from you can turn the tide of battle in an instant. But what about Jamal himself? He doesn't want power. He doesn't want to fight. He just wanted to keep the empire from falling apart. But fate did not ask what he wanted. It just puts you in the middle of the battlefield and sees what you do. 5. Hatred resides at court parties. Jamal heard whispers. "Who does this Habshi think he is? He thinks he can teach us a lesson just because he has a few armies. Let's see who gave him the right to enter the palace." In the barracks, the soldier said, "If it weren't for Jamal, we would have been on side A. No, thanks to him, faction B didn't dare to act rashly. He kept us because he wanted to protect the prince." Jamal did not explain. No explanation. No excuses. He was silent, as he had been during his days tied up on the slave ship. But this time, his silence was not weakness. It is a wall that no side can penetrate. 6. The first trap. One night, when Jamal left the palace, a group of assassins chased him. Not to kill, but to force you to take sides. They forced him to answer, "Which prince do you follow?" Jamal just said, "Follow who can keep the people." The leader laughed coldly. "There are no people in the game of power. There is only the king and the earth beneath his feet." Jamal responded by throwing the man down the steps, his face cold as steel. "Then you don't understand who this empire is dying for." They ran away, realizing they didn't have the strength to pressure such a person. 7. The price of neutrality. As the days passed, Jamal realized he was isolated. The doors that were once open for you are now closed. The greetings, once polite, were now full of sarcasm. Even in the army, some people started to fear standing near him. In times of turmoil, influential people are seen as threats. One evening, the commander called Jamal into his private barracks. He poured wine and placed the cup in front of him. "You are in a position where anyone would want to kill you," Jamal asked. "So which way is right?" The commander replied in a voice as deep as the sound of rolling stones, "There is no right way, only the path you do not regret." Jamal took a sip of wine. It was bitter but warm on the finish. He knew his life was about to take a different turn. No longer a warrior, no longer a commander, no longer a commander, no longer a slave or a valued person. Part 11. The First Throne. Aran Jamiantitha. Civil war in the Mughal Empire did not break out with the beat of drums. It began with secret meetings, secret glances of hatred, letters delivered at night, and finally a moment when the fate of the entire country was wrapped up in a small room. And in that room, Jamal stood between two paths that both led to the abyss. 1. Emperor's sick. The throne is half empty. News of the emperor's illness spread like wildfire. The people in the court panicked, outsiders trembled, and those of royal blood began to calculate. No one said it, but everyone knew the emperor is about to die, and the Mughal empire, larger than the sea and sky, will be determined by their successor. But which person? The eldest prince, legitimate, supported by the aristocracy. The little prince, smart, clever, loved by the young army. The third prince, the one Jamal saved from the swords, is the most gentle, and also the easiest target to devour. 2. Everyone goes to Jamal within 3 days. All three factions sent people to meet Jamal. Grand Prince's faction, stand with us. We will give you the highest position in the army. Little Prince's faction, you are strong, I am wise. Together we will call your name. Third Prince's faction, I won't force you. I just hope you help keep the country from falling into bad hands. 3 invitations. 3 promises. 3 roads. But Jamal knew, choosing anyone will create enemies. Choosing no one is even more dangerous. 3. The old commander gave a final warning that night. The commander called Jamal into a dark room. On the table there was only a spread-out Mughal map. He lit an oil lamp, the light falling on his battle-hardened face. Jamal, he said softly, do you know why everyone needs you? Jamal was silent. The commander continued, because in this fractured empire, you are the only one the army truly trusts. He pointed to areas on the map. Whichever side has you wins, whichever side loses you loses. Then he looked deep into Jamal's eyes, and the one who makes your army fall will come and kill you first. Jamal understood. Don't know. Escape can't stand outside. This is no longer about choosing sides. This is a matter of choosing the fate of the whole country. For the fateful night in the closed room, Jamal is asked to meet privately with the third prince, the gentlest, the least ambitious, but also the most easily crushed. The room was small and dimly lit. The prince did not wear a royal robe, just a simple cloth coat. I do not know how to persuade with words, the prince said, his voice trembling but sincere. I just know this country is falling apart, and if I don't try to save it, who will? Jamal looked at the man whose life he had saved amid the rain and swords. That prince, though not as strong as his brothers, had one thing that the rest of the court no longer had. Conscience. Jamal asked, if you were to ascend the throne, what would you do first? The prince replied immediately, tax cuts. End the repression and send troops to protect the areas being robbed. I will let the people breathe. Jamal looked at that look of someone who knew he might die but still wanted to do what had to be done. And in that moment, Jamal understood, the empire does not need the wisest man. No need for the strongest it needs the most dedicated person. Jamal knelt down on one knee. Not for royal protocol but because of respect for the rare kindness in troubled times. I will help you ascend to the throne. 5. Counterattack. In the night that decision immediately sparked an underground war. That very night, the little prince's faction sent troops to capture the third prince. They think that as long as they capture people, the throne will be theirs. But Jamal was standing in the middle of the gate, as quick as the first gust of wind of a stormy season. Jamal used his sword to deflect the 2 spears, turned around, and pulled the prince to another path. The other side's men poured in, but Jamal wouldn't let them touch the prince. Don't fight for the throne. You fight for the people worth protecting. The sound of steel clashing under the moonlight was like a bell calling fate to come. 6. The next morning, the throne changed hands before dawn. Jamal led the prince to the palace. The army, which believed Jamal, immediately knelt down. The people in the city heard the news and flocked to the palace gate. The opposing princes had to back down, not because they were weak, but because they knew Jamal wouldn't let anyone touch the person he had chosen today. And so in the faint light of dawn, a new king is declared, not the strongest. Not the oldest. Not the one with the biggest backer. The one chosen by a former slave warrior to protect 7. A new era and a kingmaker. Coronation ceremony was simple because the country was in chaos. But in front of his courtiers, the king said, the one who put me on the throne was not my family, not my faction, but he who keeps justice in his heart. Then the king turned back and pointed at Jamal. Today, this empire has a king, thanks to this person. The whole hall was filled with excitement that day. Jamal was called by a new title, the Kingmaker. Not a title. Not the position, but it is a statement of history. Part 12. Betrayed, exiled, almost everything lost. No throne is ever erected without awakening hatred, and no kingmaker lives in peace when others want to do the opposite. Jamal, from slave to kingmaker, thought the new era would bring peace. But he forgot one thing. Every light in the palace has its shadow, and that shadow always waits for the moment when people are most vulnerable to reach out. 1. jealousy. Never sleeps the day Jamal was called king. The whole capital was in an uproar. People admire, the soldiers cheered. But in the secret chambers of the palace, anger boiled like water in a copper pot set on fire. An old minister banged on the stone table. Who is he? A Habshi, black alien, has more power than us. He has humiliated me. A Turkish general said through gritted teeth. He is not of Mughal descent. His elevation to the throne is a disgrace to the court. A cold Rajput noble. We have two options, or pull him to your side, or take him out of the game. And they chose the second point too. The young king was too kind and too trusting. The king that Jamal put on the throne was a man of conscience. But because of that, he was also easy to manipulate. The ministers knelt down and shed tears like loyal men. Your Majesty, we dare not oppose Jamal, but I fear he has plans greater than the throne. A general kowtowed, Your Majesty. We cannot let military power fall into the hands of someone too powerful. One day, he may turn his sword back to the court. The young king, who always wanted to keep the peace, wavered. He trusts Jamal, but he fears war more, and they used that fear to bind him. Finally, they said their prepared words. I beg Your Majesty, send Jamal away. Leave the country alone. And the king's heart softened like wax under fire. 3. The fateful audience one morning. The king called Jamal. The hall was empty. The light was dim. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the dome. Jamal, the king said softly, his eyes red, I want to send you to the western outskirts with command of that area. A position sounds prestigious, but Jamal understood its meaning all too well. Far from the court, away from the loyal army, away from power, far from where the king can be protected. Another way of saying go in exile. Jamal looked at the king for a long time, not angry, not in protest, just one question. Your Majesty did this for someone or for them? The king bowed his head. That's the answer. Jamal knelt for the first time, not out of loyalty, but out of deep sadness. I understand. No one to hold him, no one to hold his hand. One man placed the king on the throne, now pushed away by that very throne. 4. The day of leaving the capital, no flags, no drums when Jamal passed through the city gates to leave the capital. Only a few old soldiers came to see him off. There was no military escort, as was customary for a general, no band, no officers. Jamal rode, his cloak dark, his head bowed slightly. The wind blew through, causing the shirt to flutter behind her like a wounded bird. A young soldier ran after him, his eyes red. General, did we do something wrong? Jamal put his hand on his shoulder. It's not that we did wrong, it is this world that fears those who do not belong to it. The soldier burst into tears. Jamal turned his horse around, looking at the city gate where he had been hailed. Now it stands there, like a stone coffin. Then he turned and walked away. 5. The enemy side makes the final blow. Jamal had not gone far when the bad news came. The little prince and the ministers were discussing how to Jamal permanently. They not only expelled him from the court, they wanted him dead on the way, so no one could blame them. That night, a team of assassins ambushed in the forest. Jamal heard a strange rustling of leaves. He drew his sword. Come out, said Jamal. I know you are there. The leader stepped out. You should have stayed at the bottom of society, Jamal. You climbed too high, and now you must fall deeply. The war broke out. No one witnessed, no one recorded. There was only the sound of metal, panting, and the crackling of the night forest under the moonlight. The last man to fall. Jamal also collapsed, his shoulders slashed deeply, blood soaking his shirt, but he didn't die. Not for God's sake, but because you've been living at the bottom from the beginning, where death is your old friend. 6. He lost everything, but one thing remained. Jamal set up a makeshift tent in the woods, bandaged his wound, and looked towards the distant capital. No army next door, no title, no reputation. An empire that needed you, now want to kill you. Jamal looked at his hands that had freed him from his chains, saved the prince, and built a dynasty. Part 13. Return with reputation in the ARM wine. I expected that Jamal's return would not begin with the sound of war drums, not equal to an army entering the capital, not as good as ultimatums, which starts with whispers, soldiers' whispers, of the country people love, the frontier commanders. It all spiraled into a silent current, a current that was pulling Jamal from the depths back to the ground. 1. Rumors travel faster than the wind. After the ambush, Jamal was thought to be dead. The enemy faction secretly celebrated it. Minister also said at the banquet, the problem has been solved. All that remains is to clean up the body. But then, news came from the northwest. Jamal is alive. Then from the Punjab region, he saved a caravan of merchants from bandits. Then from the Deccan, he is teaching militia, not receiving a single penny. Small news like seeds blown in the wind, but each seed that falls trouts into admiration. Soldiers passed on. He was fired but still protected the people. A person like that, how can he be a rebel? If he comes back, I will follow. Prestige does not need a throne. Credibility only requires truth. 2. Old soldiers began to leave the capital to find Jamal. The first group of border guards left the barracks. Then the second group. Then the third. Group.noisels.no rebellion. Just let it go. They left the court not because of hunger, not because of anger, but because they believed in a person the court wanted to destroy. One morning, Jamal was lighting a fire to boil water when he heard footsteps from behind. 12 soldiers stood before him, their armor scratched, their voices hoarse. "General, where you go, we go." Jamal shook his head. "You abandoning your camp is a serious crime." A person kneels down. "No problem, staying in the court is a crime." Jamal was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, but I'm not raising an army to take revenge. I just want to stabilize the country." The soldiers said in unison, "We come for stability." From that moment, the first seeds of Jamal's forces were sown. 3. The old commanders returned one by one. News of Jamal's desertion reached the ears of those who had served under him. One blood-red afternoon, a wooden door swung open. The old commander, the one who had warned Jamal, entered the makeshift camp where he was staying. He looked at him, his eyes filled with tears, but his voice was still sharp as a spear. "I'm old, but I'd rather die beside someone I trust, than live with those we despise." Jamal bowed his head slightly. This is not just a returning commander. This is a symbol of return. His return caused hundreds of soldiers who had served under him to immediately turn around and follow the trail to find Jamal. Numbers grew so quickly that Jamal had to divide the work of setting up tents, cooking, and arranging guard shifts from a hunted man. He became the head of a barracks of hundreds of soldiers. Those are not rebels. That is people who are loyal to integrity. 4. The people of the border area gradually sided with Jamal. On remote villages, Jamal helped people dig canals, clear land after looting, and distribute food left in the barracks. People asked, "Why do you do these things? You no longer have a position." Jamal smiled. "Title is something people give. The heart is what we keep." That simple saying spread throughout the region. People began bringing food, water, and herbs to Jamal's camp. "They don't call you general," they called him by the most rustic name, protector. Warrior does not need a throne to be respected. You just need to stand on the people's side. 5. Court began to realize its mistakes. In the capital, the ministers were startled when they heard the report. Soldiers in the northwest deserted to follow Jamal. Some border posts are empty. The people brought food to Jamal. Jamal is controlling an area larger than 3 provinces. A minister banged the table. "We chased one person, and now we have to face an entire land." The Turkish general roared. "He is about to rebel." But a young official said tremblingly, "Gentlemen, if he wanted to rebel, he would have sent troops to attack the capital. But he didn't. He just protects the people." The truth silenced the entire conference. They chased away an honest man, and then that kindness becomes what they ... Unbeatable. 6. The king stood at the crossroads of life and death. When he heard that Jamal had hundreds of soldiers, the young king turned pale. Not for fear of being overthrown, but because he began to understand. "I lost my most loyal person." The king was torn between 2 sides. On one side, the ministers demanded to send troops to destroy Jamal. On one side is the haunting thought that he has betrayed the only person who has kept him stable. One late night, the king said to his closest courtier, "I want to see Jamal. I need to hear the truth from his own mouth." But the ministers immediately stopped it, fearing that the meeting would bring Jamal back to the center, so the king was imprisoned in his own morse. 7. The push that made Jamal come back. One morning, a family ran to Jamal's camp. The father knelt down and hugged his legs. "Please save us. The little prince's army is raiding our region." They said the new king was weak, so they wanted to occupy the land. Jamal clenched his fists. That is no longer a matter of being expelled from the court. This is a strife the country is being torn apart for. The ambitious Jamal stood up, drawing his sword from its sheath. The steel reflected the barracks' fire. "Already, we do not go on conquest, we go to keep the people safe." The whole barracks shouted in unison for the people. At that moment, Jamal knew the comeback has begun, not for revenge but to correct the court. Part 14. The War Against the Little Princess. First major battle of the return. Throughout history, there have been battles fought over land. There are battles that people fight for power, but the battle Jamal is about to face is a battle for honor, the honor of a man who has been pushed into darkness, but still stands tall when the light turns its back. It was the first battle that marked Jamal's return, and it was the battle that the entire Mughal Empire stopped to watch. Who really deserves to be called the people's protector? One enemy, the Little Prince's faction, has revealed. Young Prince's faction, who had tried to capture Jamal before the king's coronation, now officially rebelled. He no longer hides his ambitions. He was no longer afraid of the young king. He no longer wanted to argue. He wants land grab to then take over the land and the people, and take over power from the people. His army poured into remote areas, burned rice, forced people to voluntarily follow him, and hung his flag on every roof as a declaration. This dynasty is about to change. People cry. The royal army was silent. The ministers pretended not to know. Only one person, who had been banished by the court, heard the cry for help, and Returned. Jamal. 2. Jamal marches not for the king, but for the people. The drum is not beaten. The flag was not raised. Jamal's army set out in silence, the only sound being the pounding of footsteps on dry ground. The old commander walked beside him, his voice hoarse as gravel. This day, I knew would come. The day we fight is not for anyone to sit on the throne, but to keep the country from those who want to tear it apart. Jamal replied slowly, no one is born a leader, but there are people who are thrown into leadership positions by circumstances. The army behind heard and tightened their weapons. They do not go for the court, they go for the person in front of them. 3. Sharpa village, the hotspot of the war. The rebels' first stop was Sharpa village, a small village but located on an important trade route. Upon arrival, the scene unfolded. The house was burned down. The tied man. The woman hugged her child and hid in the bushes. The old man knelt down and begged for forgiveness. The rebels screamed like bloodthirsty wild animals. A young soldier following Jamal was angry. General, shall we attack now? Jamal raised his hand to stop him. Don't let the people get into trouble. He lowered his voice, his eyes sharp as steel. We hit like the wind. Come fast. Go fast. Don't let any people suffer more pain. Those are not the words of the commanding general. Those are the words of a man who has lived in pain. For the fight breaks out. Jamal fights like a spirit. Returned when the signal was blown. Jamal's men charged like knives cutting through the night. No shouting, don't no exposure, don't no noise. They fought the way Jamal taught them. Protect the people first. Hit the bad guy later. Do not kill, surrender. The rebels were the opposite. They were chaotic, greedy, aggressive, and undisciplined. Jamal charged into the enemy formation like a black wind. Each of his sword strokes was precise, clean, without the excess of someone who wanted to show off. A rebel soldier shouted, "It's him! It's that damn Habshi! Stop him!" But how to stop a man who survived a sea of slavery? How to stop the one who was once hunted by the entire court, but still stood up stronger? Jamal fought like a man with nothing left to lose. But that's why he unbeatable. 5. The rebellion is broken, but the battle has only just begun. In less than an hour, the rebel flag was pulled down. The commander was captured. The army fled in panic, like a herd of wild animals. The villagers of Sharpa rushed out, crying and hugging Jamal's soldiers. An old man knelt before Jamal. "You are truly a protector. He comes, we live." Jamal lifted him up. "I'm late, but I will not let this happen again." From afar, the old commander approached and placed his hand on Jamal's shoulder. "But do not repeat, that means we have to do more than protect a village." Jamal looked to the east where the little prince's faction's large camp was located, a sky hazy with the smoke of their bonfires. A bugle call echoed. The commander said slowly, "They know you're back." Part 15. The fateful battle. Jamal defeated the rebel army and confronted the little prince. There are battles not to be won, that there are battles not for land. There are battles not to prove strength. There are battles that define a man. And the Battle of Darien Valley is where history defines Jamal no longer as a servant of honor, no longer as a kingmaker, but as a power that no side can overshadow. 1. Darien Valley. Dawn of a storm. The morning before the battle, fog covered the valley. The hills were high, the grass was wet, and below, thousands of rebels camped like a sea of black spears. The drums of the little prince's side resounded like the rapid heartbeat of a beast waiting to tear its prey apart. The old commander stood next to Jamal, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Today, either he dies, or this country dies." Jamal nodded slightly. His voice was deep and steady as rock. "No one died today except those who choose the path of destruction below." The little prince rides a white horse, his cloak bright red. He looked up the hill, saw Jamal, and smiled as if he saw something that once belonged to him. "He's here. The slave who thinks he is a hero has arrived," he shouted, making his men laugh. But the evil man's laughter always trembles when standing before the one who truly has nothing to lose. 2. Jamal walks down the valley. No fear, no hesitation. Jamal didn't wait for the bugle call. Wait for the battle drums. Don't wait for your troops to go down first, uncle. Take the sword and walk down the valley. Alone. Both sides were silent. The wind blowing through the grass made a sound like the whisper of the past. The little prince laughed. "You intend to defeat my thousands of soldiers with your 2 legs." Jamal stopped a few dozen paces away from him. "Are not. I came to ask you something." The whole rebel faction was in an uproar. Jamal said each word clearly. "Why do you have to make this country bleed? Your father just died. Your brother has just ascended the throne. You have a chance to do good, so why choose to do the cruel thing?" The little prince curled his lips. "Because I want to, and we have the right to want it." Then he waved his hand and ordered, "Kill him." 3. The battle breaks out. 2 waves crash into each other. The whole rebel army poured in like a black wave, but as soon as they charged, from behind, Jamal's men poured down like a flood. The shout shook the hill. For the people, for Mut, for justice. The battle broke out not with thunder, but with the sound of rocks breaking underwater. Deep, strong, and unstoppable, Jamal charged into the rebel formation like a stroke of fate. One slash cut the spear shaft. One turns, another falls. One kick clears the way for your troops to advance. Not a single movement is wasted. Not a moment wasted. Jamal hit as if he were cutting away the injustice that had weighed down his life. On the other side, the little prince watched, his eyes filled with anger. Impossible. He is just an exile. But power does not lie in title, it lies in the heart that has suffered enough to fear nothing. For the rebels were defeated, but the little prince did not run away. After an hour of fighting, the rebel formation began to crack. The sub-commander was cut off his horse. The enemy ranks were in disarray. Some threw weapons, some ran away. But the little prince, though cruel, was not a coward. He pulled his sword and rode straight towards Jamal. "We end here." Jamal turned, saw him coming, and stepped forward, not backing down. To horses, past each other. The two swords clashed with a metallic sound that tore through the heavens and earth. It's no longer a two-person fight. It is a struggle between two roads of an empire. One side is arbitrary ambition. On one side is justice for the trampled. 5. Confrontation not only with swords, but with conscience. The little prince turned his horse and charged again. Jamal did not ride. He stood, sword raised, steady as a pillar of stone. He swung his sword down. Jamal interrupted. He swept across. Jamal took a half step back. He stabbed like a snake. Jamal spun, deflecting the sword, knocking him off balance. The prince shouted, "You think you're better than me? You are just a slave." Jamal clenched his sword hilt. "Correct. I was a slave, but I am not a slave to greed." One slash. The little prince's sword flew out of his hand. Spinning several times in the air, he fell off his horse and onto the ground. Gasping for breath, his face turned purple with humiliation. Jamal stepped forward, placing the tip of his sword against his chest. "Why don't you choose a better path?" Jamal asked. The prince smiled faintly. "For the good road. It is never fast enough to reach the throne." Jamal looked at him and knew he was gone long before the battle even began. He lowered his sword. "I don't kill people who lose," Jamal said. 6. The rebels disintegrate, and new rumors about Jamal spread. News of the little prince's defeat spread like wildfire. The people of Darien rejoiced. The royal army was confused. The major factions stalled. The young king heard the news and burst into tears in the middle of the court meeting. But the most important thing is not winning, it's Jamal not killing the little prince in battle. The one who has the chance to kill but does not kill is more fearsome than the one who kills to demonstrate strength. For the people, it is humanity. For the court, it was a warning. 7. Jamal understands this battle is just the prelude. As the sun set, Jamal stood on the hill overlooking the battlefield that the wind blew, blowing away the smell of blood, blowing away the lingering screams. The old commander stepped forward. "You saved this land, but from now on, the entire court will not dare to sleep in peace," Jamal replied, his voice low and steady. "I did not come back to be king. I returned to keep the king from being overthrown." The commander laughed hoarsely. "That's why people fear you more than all those who want to be king." Jamal looked towards the capital where the palace lights were dim, like a dying fire. "We have to go back," Jamal said. The day he entered the palace as eighth one who maintains the stability of the empire, not far away. Part 16. Jamal returns to the capital and the shock in the palace. There were footsteps that made the ground shake. There were those who returned and made the whole court hold its breath. And there are people who, just by appearing, make history stop and look. The day Jamal returned to the Mughal capital after his victory in the Darien Valley was such a day, not because you brought a huge army, because you took new power, but because he returned as someone the court could no longer ignore. 1. The gates of the citadel opened, but not to welcome Jamal. Approached the city gate. Behind him were thousands of civilians following to seek protection, and more than 1,000 soldiers left the capital to follow him on the wall. The guards looked down, not shouting, not threatening. They just whispered, "It's him. It was Jamal, the one we abandoned." The city gates open, but no drumbeat. Air Force band. No welcome ceremony. There was only a heavy silence, a silence not of reverence, but of insecurity. 2. People ran out to welcome them first, while officials stood behind to observe. As Jamal entered, people from both sides of the street rushed out. The bread delivery man. Water carrier. People kneeling to ask for help for relatives captured in the chaos. Children clung to his armor, calling, "The guardian is here." The crowd jostled, forming a lifeline, but behind that crowd, the Mandarin stood still, their faces cold as stone statues. Some people are scared, someone is angry, some people regret, but no one dares to face it directly. They push each other like birds that have lost their nest, only afraid of one thing: if he wants to overthrow the court, then today is the day. 3. The palace held an emergency meeting as soon as they heard that Jamal had entered the city. In the main hall, the officials argued with each other. "Your Majesty, he led his troops back, clearly intending to rebel. He must be arrested immediately. If we don't kill him today, he will be on the throne tomorrow." Your Majesty must protect the throne. The young king, who had been swayed by these very people, remained silent for a long time. Then he said, he just saved the entire Darien region. He defeated the rebellion that the court could not resist. He did not kill the little prince. I ask you, why would such a person want to rebel? No one answered, because the truth can be distorted. But loyalty is never erased. 4. Jamal enters the palace without asking, without fear, and without pride. As the doors to the great hall opened, and Jamal entered, the whole court held its breath. Not golden armor. Do not carry a ceremonial sword, wearing only old armor stained with blood from the Battle of Darien. But it was that simplicity that made him look more dangerous than any general. Jamal got down on one knee, politely but seriously. I, Jamal, return to your Majesty. Silence. Silence so great that one could hear the hearts beating in the chests of the trembling people. The king stood up and stepped down from his throne. Something unprecedented. He took Jamal's hand and pulled him up. You do not have to kneel before me. If anyone here has to kneel before whom, then we must kneel before the one who saved the country. The whole hall exploded in discussion. The ministers' faces turned pale. 5. A reverse interrogation. Jamal asks. The court answers. The king wanted to say something, but Jamal raised his hand for permission. Sire, before I say anything, I want to ask the court a question. He took a few steps forward, facing dozens of officials. His eyes did not carry hatred, but sharp enough to make those who plotted to kill him bow their heads. Why? Jamal said slowly. When the people were being robbed, did the court not send troops? No one answered. Why? He continued. When the rebellion... Part 17. The final darkness. The plot to overthrow Jamal and the palace purge. There are enemies hitting us straight in the chest with swords and spears, but there are also enemies who fight with smiles, with soft words, with long shadows under the lights. And for Jamal, the biggest fight of his life does not take place on the bloody and steel-filled Darien battlefield. That takes place in the velvet-lined corridors of the Mughal palace, where swords are hidden in sleeves, and death is wrapped in wishes. 1. Jamal's return causes panic among those in the shadows. The day Jamal was received by the king, the court was shocked. Those who once pushed him away, wanted him dead, now tremble because they understand one thing. If the king had just apologized to Jamal in front of the entire court, tomorrow it will be their turn to pay the price. So that night, when the capital fell asleep, a group of ministers met in a closed room. The oil lamp flickered as if afraid of falling into someone's ears. Someone whispered, Jamal lives. We die. Another person. He grew up so fast in the army, the people, and even in the eyes of His Majesty. Another person knocked on the table. Then don't let him live long. The room was silent. But that silence is the sign of the crime that has just been born. Point 2. They dare not kill openly, so they choose conspiracy. One proposes, we use mercenaries. If we fail, blame it on the rebels. Others objected. No, he is a warrior. Mercenaries are not enough. An old minister, who was famous for his cruelty, said slowly, no need for sword. A rumor is enough. All eyes turned to him. He continued, let us plant in His Majesty the greatest fear that Jamal saved the country not out of loyalty, but to wait for the day to take the throne. Another person laughed. Yes, he did not accept the position, did not accept the land, but that very thing made the king even more afraid. And so the lies began to be blown out like poisonous smoke. Jamal will create his own army. Jamal will force the king to abdicate. Jamal has the people, just the throne. Those sentences were whispered to the mandarins, then the guards, then the palace maids. Spread like an epidemic. They don't need proof, they just need fear. 3. The palace began to change its gaze towards Jamal. A few days later, every time Jamal walked down the hall, the officials avoided his eyes. The palace maid bowed her head, lower than usual. The guard stood upright, but his face was tense. Jamal sensed it. He used to live in the forest, lived among slaves, lived in the shadow of ambitious people. You know the taste of betrayal. It smells like cold metal on a winter night. For one final lie stabbed the king straight in the back. On the 4th night after Jamal's return, a close minister came to see the young king. He pretended to tremble. Your Majesty, I have important matters to attend to. The king was tired, but still asked, what? The minister knelt down so hard that he thought his head would be crushed to prove his loyalty. Jamal is preparing to attack the capital. The king was startled. You're lying. Jamal saved me. The minister bowed his head. I understand. But your Majesty should know. The more people appear to have no need for power is the one waiting for the last moment. The king turned pale. He wanted to believe Jamal, but over the past few days, rumors have seeped into his mind like underground water seeping into rock. Finally, he asked, is there any evidence? The minister pulled out a piece of paper. Secret news. Jamal's troops are stationed outside the city, more than His Majesty ordered. The king did not know that the army was only there to protect refugees. But a lie, when told at the right time, can make people's hearts waver. 5. The king orders an audience, and Jamal understands the trap. That night, the royal soldiers came to find Jamal. His Majesty summons you immediately. Jamal understood. He caught the guard's eyes, confused, sad, and scared. Don't be afraid, Jamal, but fear the order they are forced to obey. Jamal turned to the old commander. If I don't come back, protect the people. The old commander wanted to follow, but Jamal shook his head. Not. This is a path I must walk alone. And so Jamal entered the great hall, where the yellow light clearly shows people waiting to see if he lives or dies. Point 6. The confrontation. Two honest and weak people face each other as Jamal knelt. The king looked at him for a long time. That gaze is no longer as clear as before, full of doubts that others sow. The king asked Jamal, "Do you want the throne?" The whole hall shook. Jamal raised his head and looked straight into the king's eyes. "If I wish, then the throne no longer belongs to your majesty." The whole hall was silent. Jamal continued, "I have an army. Have people's heart, have a reputation, but I did not set foot in this palace to rob." God stepped in. To keep an official shouted, "Lie, he wants to rebel." Jamal turned around, not angry, not shaking, just asked, "If we want to rebel, why is the little prince still alive?" No one answered. That sentence pierced through all the lies. 7. The king realizes the truth and orders a purge. The king stood up. He looked at Jamal, then at the officials. Look at Jamal, look at the officials. His heart struggled like two streams of water flowing in opposite directions, but finally, he turned to Jamal and said, "I believe you." The whole hall exploded in chaos. The king shouted, "Whoever sows lies, catch him. Whoever hurts Jamal, go to jail." The royal soldiers immediately rushed into the crowd of officials. Screams rang out. Silk robes fell off, revealing people trembling like leaves. Jamal stood still. He is not happy. He is not gloating. Because you understand, in the battle between light and darkness, no one really wins. 8. That night, Jamal stood on the roof of the palace, knowing that this was not the end. The old commander found him on the roof of the palace, looking out over the city. "You win," he said. Jamal shook his head. "Not. I only survive one more day." The commander sighed. "So what are you doing tomorrow?" Jamal clenched his hands on the stone railing. "Tomorrow, I will not let anyone use darkness to destroy this country again." Part 18. The glorious ending. Jamal saves the kingdom but chooses to leave an immortal legacy. ****. Not everyone who becomes a hero wants to live in the light. Not everyone who builds a dynasty wants to sit on the throne. There are people who, when they have completed their duty to history, simply choose to leave. Jamal is such a person. 1. The kingdom is saved, but Jamal no longer belongs there. After the purge in the palace, liars are caught, the rebel generals were executed, the little prince was exiled to a remote area. The Mughal dynasty stood firm again, like a boat just passed through rough waves. But as soon as the country stabilized, the whole capital awaited what was to come. What position will Jamal take? Prime Minister, Commander-in-Chief, Protector of the nation, the king's lifelong assistant. The young king thought so too. He believes that Jamal's time to rise to the pinnacle of power has finally come. But the most anticipated one chose to follow the unpredictable path. Point 2. The refusal stunned the entire court. During a morning service, the king stood up and placed a roll of golden silk on the stone table. "Jamal, I appoint you as the great protector of the nation, equal power to prime minister, command of the entire army, right to handle government affairs on behalf of the king when I am absent." The whole court was in an uproar. Some officials looked at each other pale. Some bowed their heads in admission. "This is worth it." But Jamal stepped forward and said, "Sire, I do not accept that." The palace was silent. An official exclaimed, "Is he crazy?" The king asked, his voice trembling. "Why? I want you by my side," Jamal replied. "Your Majesty, I do not belong to the palace. This country can prosper only when your Majesty can stand on his own without me." The young king frowned. "I owe you everything. You are the one who built me up." Jamal gently, "No, your Majesty. The people are the ones who make the king. I just give back justice." Those words were like a mirror reflecting into the king's heart. Power does not belong to anyone, but of the country. 3. Jamal meets the king one last time, not as a general and a king, but as two equals. That day, Jamal was called into the private harem. There are no guards. No ceremony. There were only two people, the young king and the black warrior who had saved his life. The king said, "If you go, I will lose my strongest support." Jamal replied, his voice soft but hard as well-honed steel, "No, your Majesty, you lost me, but will find yourself." The young king sat down. "Tired as a child, I fear one day being surrounded by greedy people again." Jamal looked out the window, where the sunlight fell on the stone floor like drops of gold. "When your Majesty keeps his heart upright, the wicked will reveal themselves. And when your Majesty believes in the people, no one can turn people over." The king was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Where are you going?" Jamal smiled. "Back to where I was exiled, in the middle of the forest, among the poor, among people who need a pair of hands." The king stood up and hugged Jamal for the first and last time. "Go away. But if the country needs, come back," Jamal replied. "When the people need me, I will come. No position required, no order needed." For the day Jamal left the capital, no army, no shouts. But full of tears, Jamal did not want a farewell ceremony, so he left at dawn. No flag, not empty. Air escort. But when he stepped out of the city gate, a scene no one was prepared for awaited. Thousands of people stood on both sides of the road. Bread delivery man, the person lifting the bowl of water. The man placed his hand on his chest and bowed. Children ran after him and grabbed his shirt. No one shouted, "General, they just call Jamal. Don't forget us." The old commander also came, standing straight as if the years had never aged him. "Are you really going?" Jamal put his hand on his shoulder. "I go so that the country does not depend on me. That is peace." The commander smiled bitterly. "What about me? You keep the capital for me," Jamal said, his eyes shining as if they were transmitting a flame. 5. The legendary disappearance. Jamal left the capital in the light golden morning, and people saw his shadow gradually getting smaller in the middle of the long road. No one knows where he went. Some people say he returned to the northwest to build a school for poor children. Some say he went to Deccan to suppress banditry. Some say he went even further to the sea, where he was taken as a slave to close the wounds of his childhood. No one can confirm, but wherever there is darkness, people passed on word of mouth. "Last night I saw someone who looked like Jamal save my family." The king heard those stories. It smiled and said, "It is a legacy greater than the throne." 6. Immortal legacy. Jamal is not buried in a tomb, but in people's hearts many years later. When the king grew old, when the dynasty changes, when temples collapsed, king statues broke. But one thing is not lost: Jamal's name. There is no monument, no tomb. There is no anniversary, but his name has been told through hundreds of years as a story by word of mouth. The story of a slave who became a savior of the kingdom. The story of a king who doesn't need a throne. The story of a warrior who chose to leave when power knelt at his feet. And in those stories there is always a philosophy. The strongest person is the one who does not need to prove that he is strong.